This episode, my conversation with collage artist Duane Toops, got me thinking. I realized I got caught up in multiple dichotomies: art versus craft, intuition versus analysis, conduit versus creator. And then, as Duane says, there's also that quiet space between things, the unseen. I need to remember that dichotomies set up false choices. Here's my conversation with Duane. And I'm really quite thrilled, Duane, to speak with you today because it's Craig who recommended to speak with you, Craig McIntyre. And so then I went to look at your work and I was like, that's pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
For some reason, I think about painting and I think about painters having individual styles, people who draw, they have individuals. For some reason in my head, collage would just be collage. And now that I've seen the work of a few different collage artists, I belatedly have realized, of course, that it's so personal. Your style, you get to be able to anticipate. If I see something, I'm like, oh, that's Duane.
I love that. I don't think I could ask for a better compliment than just that. I do a lot that's analog. I do some that's a hybrid of digital and analog. I do some that's just more image focused or a bit that's more figurative, some that's more type-based, and I have a lot of interest when it comes to the medium. And so I'm always concerned uh, how recognizable I still am. And so that's just wonderful to hear that it is. But I think that's one of the most incredible things about it as an art form is that you could give the same source material to, however many different collage artists, and they will all react and produce something with that source material that will be worlds apart.
The other thing I'll just comment on before I start asking you questions is you're very prolific.
It's so funny to hear that that word has come up so often, and I'm always a little put off by it in some ways. I've been called that a lot, and I hate bringing up that I've been called that because I don't want to have that seem as a humble brag, but it doesn't feel that way to me. I just love the work. I think in a lot of ways, I feel like I was just created to produce work. There's something cathartic and therapeutic and contemplative and meditative about moving those pieces of paper around and seeing what happens. And I keep my creative practice fairly scheduled and fairly disciplined. I know when my windows of opportunity are to work, and I just try to utilize them as best I can.
I mean, I think it also shows a willingness to share because you're just willing. I don't know that you show everything that you create, and I don't know how much you create, but you certainly seem to be willing to share a large part of it. So you don't hold back your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important part of my creative practice. I think that's an important part of maybe even the mental health component of my creative practice. I try not to be precious about it. Annie Dillard had a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it and probably poorly, but she basically said something to the effect of like, spend it all. Don't ever hold anything back. Don't ever hold it in reserve. Inevitably, what will happen more or less is it will end up kind of clogging the well. And the more you spend it, the more you just put it all out, don't save anything for a later time, the more you'll find that that well is constantly renewable. I spend it all. I look at myself as maybe a crafts person in a way, in that I am here to do a job, to create this thing and to put it out and then move on to the next thing. I have, I think, almost like a line cook's mentality when it comes to art. I played it and I put it out. I played it and I put it out, and I move on to the next ticket, you know.
Okay, that's interesting. I think we might come back to that idea of craft and you as a line cook. I like that, how you explained that. But I want to start to go back first to ask you, what was it that brought you to making collage?
That's difficult. I think there was a lot of circumstances that brought me there. I was a musician for a very long time. And for the longest time of my life, and especially my creative life, I really thought that was the path I was going down. I invested my whole self into that. And, you know, like so many things, it just didn't work out. You know, I was married at the time, I had kids, and just it got more and more difficult to try to keep that creative life afloat. I got very disheartened and I let that go. And I'm the type of person that needs a creative outlet. And so I dabbled in a lot of things for a while. I did some videography for a bit. I did some photography. The visual arts have always been very important to me. When I was younger, I drew a lot as a kid. I really wanted to be a painter, but just never quite developed the right skill set. Or I had an art teacher I think I was a freshman in high school, that gave me a book on abstract expressionism, and I encountered the work of Jackson Pollock for the first time. And I still look at that moment as one of those paradigm shifting moments for me, where just the whole shape of the world changed when I saw Jackson Pollock's work. And I knew somehow I wanted to make work like that in some way. I tried a lot of things, and I came to collage through a place of almost sheer frustration. I needed some kind of creative outlet, and I tried it. The more time I spent with it and the deeper I got into it, the more I found my voice.
Okay, I need to go back now to the craft thing. You mentioned your need to create and then I go back to, you as the line cook, and then you've got to put the work out, and that feels more like craftsperson than artist to you. Why?
I think there's an important distinction there. It's funny, I was just recently rereading the book Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, and he draws a line of distinction between the artist and the craftsperson. And a lot of it, I think, revolves around the relationship to the work. You have the stereotypical understanding of the artist as precious about the materials or precious about the work, precious about the process of doing the work, has different notions regarding its profundity or his or her own personal genius. And then you have the craftsperson that creates something. They are enlisted to create a specific thing because they have the discipline and the skill set, and they've developed a particular methodology of working to produce a particular result. I don't want to make it sound so mechanistic, but I think there's something beautiful in that discipline and that process of just honing your craft to such an extent where it does become almost a beautiful kind of monotony, where it's muscle memory and it's intuition and it's feeling, and it's not any kind of something so transcendent.
The only thing I would say about that, and I'm not sure that this is right at all. For me, I would make the distinction based on how much of yourself you express and invest in the piece. So for craftspeople, and this, as I'm saying it, I'm sure this is not right. So I'm just going to put it out there, and then you tell me what you think. So as craftspeople, let's say you're carving wooden spoons. They're very beautiful wooden spoons, but the spoon is the same. I can make 10
Mm-hmm.
spoons today and I make 12 spoons tomorrow, and they're the same 22 spoons. And people won't necessarily look at the spoon and say, I see Duane in that
Mm.
spoon.
Yeah. I mean, there's some problems with the analogy that I'm aware of, and I think, you know, anything metaphorical breaks down at some point, and I think that's a great pressure point to put your finger on, because yeah, I don't want to produce the same piece of work every time. So there is that stark difference. I think I look at it the way we were just talking about, as a way to just keep myself moving in the work. and to not get too caught up in the weeds of it. But yes, I think there is a very real kind of self-expression. Obviously, that's why I do it. But I think for me, that's a result of the work, of actually doing the work. There's something about the collage process for me that is always already a process of self-discovery. Especially with collage, you have these preformed materials that are already in front of you, and it's literally just an intuitive response of what piece draws to you, that like, I need to make something around this, and I don't know why. Maybe it's the color, maybe it's the figure, maybe it's something about it, and it's so intuitive. There's an unconscious quality to it. Somewhere in just the motion of going through the process, the expression happens if you just show up.
I said earlier that I think I am starting to see, I can recognize a Duane collage as I'm scanning through Instagram. And some of that's just a more surface stylistic thing that I feel like I'm starting to see some language of collage that's happening in your pieces. What do you think of yourself you are expressing in those pieces? And do you see the lines among them?
I think for me, the one overarching goal I have in everything I make is, I always say I want to make quiet things. I feel like we are inundated with noise and everything is so loud all the time. And I am adamant and intentional about not adding to the noise, about trying to make something quiet, trying to cut through the excess and find a place more minimal. Peter Rollins has this expression that I think connects to, I think, what I try to do with my work is create a desert in the oasis. So I think I look for that in my work in whatever way that shows up.
I don't want to make any assumptions and I'm not going to get personal at all, but can I maybe think that was something you needed?
That's
Quiet.
definitely something I needed at the time. It's still something I need now. I think that's why maybe I can produce so much work. It's just such a daily necessity for me to have that contemplated time. I think the more I collage, the more it almost becomes an extension of my meditation practice. I feel like the two are very seamlessly linked because it is all about attention and observation. And both of it's noticing, and then the act of noticing what I'm noticing and what might be behind that, and just being with whatever that might be.
I love the way you talk about collage. I don't have a breadth of experience with it as an art form, but I really enjoy speaking with people who do collage and getting these different perspectives on what it means for them. And the way you talk about it related to your meditation practice, I think is really, really interesting.
I think I've only begun to really see those connections recently. And now that I've seen it, it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so I start noticing it more and more and trying my best to kind of lean into it, really paying attention to what grabs my attention and not trying to question it or persuade it, but just really noticing it and trying to follow it and see where it goes and letting it be kind of a call and response. It's a funny thing to talk about because it is so instinctual and so kind of personal and meditative, without belaboring that word, that you don't think about any of that in the process, or at least I try not to. Like I love the process of collaging because I don't have to think about it. I don't want to make that sound like there's no thought going into it, but it is just intuitive and it is about feeling. It's always strange to have some of these conversations because you're trying to project onto it what you think might have been happening while you're actually doing it.
It sounds like it's the two separate processes in a way. There's the creation where you said call and response, follow instinctively what you're drawn to and allow it to emerge. And then you do take time afterwards to look at it and consider what it means to you. Is that fair to like separate them out like that?
I think it's something like that. I think it does happen on an unconscious level during the process because I think naturally you're connecting with something either within the material or within yourself, or it's always within yourself. You're the lens through which you access everything else. So there's no outside of you. So I think it is transpiring in the moment, but you're not always privy to it. You know, you have to discover it at the end of the process as well. But there are some times where you see connections that make perfect sense after the fact, but you don't know why that decision was made then, other than it looked good or it felt right. Sometimes it feels like you're making just very aesthetic decisions, and then when it's all finished, you find that there was something more to it than that. I think it's about staying out of the way, and just letting it happen. Madeline L'Engle said something to the effect that when the artist is the servant of the work is better than the artist. And I take that to heart. So I like to think that the work is smarter than I am and knows more than I know. And so I don't try to question the work too much. I just let it show up how it shows up and let it become what it becomes. I think that's also why I'm so willing to share so much of it, because I feel like I played more of a conduit role. In that regard, I think maybe that does connect back to that craftsman idea. The work knows what it wants to be, and I'm just here to usher it to that fruition, to kind of create whatever pathways it needs to become what it wants to be without sounding too out there about it.
It also reminds me of, and I'm not going to remember her name, the author. I think she's the Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert, yeah.
And she has the TED Talk where she talks about really just being a conduit for whatever the stories are that are out there in the world. They just pass through her and she writes them out. But she doesn't consider herself the creator of them. She's just a medium through which the stories pass onto pages.
Yeah. I mean, I connect to that to some extent. I do find that I'm making decisions along the way. What motivates them at the time is always hard to say. And that's where it does get hazy and it gets fuzzy. The lines between who's doing what and when do get blurry. And I think one of the lovely things about collage is what you're responding to in some ways when you look at a collage's work is their choices, which is really interesting because those choices are usually based upon something that the artist wasn't thinking about either. So it's just this really interesting reciprocity that occurs in that roundabout way.
Is there a piece that you're working on right now that's in progress or something that you recently completed that you would want to talk about? I just would be curious for you to look at something that you're working on and just get a set, like, just explain to me where you are in it.
I have a piece on my desk right now that I can see from here. I'm constantly trying to push myself to do different things in slightly different ways, which is where that whole monologue about artist versus craftsman falls apart because I'm not trying to just create the same thing over and over. I have a tendency to work usually small. That might be another secret of being able to produce work at the pace that I do. Is I usually work somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4x6, maybe 5x7, so not particularly large pieces. Some of that is intentional because of time constraints. I'm mindful of the small windows of time I have to actually do work. On a more interesting kind of maybe theoretical side of it is like in this day and age when most art is shared in online environments, scale becomes a really interesting thing to play with. It doesn't mean what it once did, and it allows you to zoom in closer on things that are smaller And so I try to use that to my advantage because I feel like when you do work small and you are kind of manipulating that small scale, the details matter even more. The small nuances of a photo or the texture of a particular type of paper becomes more impactful, becomes imbued with more meaning than I feel like it would be otherwise. And suddenly that texture up against a particular image now means something that it didn't mean before, or may have not meant at a larger scale. But right now, I'm working on a piece that's slightly larger. I was recently sent an open call for a different kind of art show. It was asking for a size that I don't normally work in. So I've been kind of doing some sketches to try to get my head around working at that size. Because I normally work at a smaller size, usually my edges are kind of clean. I stick to very well defined rectangle of composition. Because now I've got more space to work with. I'm playing with the arrangement. So I've got a piece that's on my desk that's very irregularly arranged. The material is very similar to what I would normally work with. And so it's been just trying to understand space in a different way and understand what those connections might mean in response to it.
How is that different when you're working digitally? Because I'm imagining that what you're describing right now is an analog. It's a physical. It sounds like a physical piece. Scale size anyway, when you're creating digitally becomes less of an issue, I imagine, because you can blow it out or you can make it small. Do you have a preference for working digitally or analog?
For analog, I love the tactile nature of it. There's something liberating about the limitations of paper. It's another reason I even like working small. There's something so creatively inviting about having to be so restrained that it's very interesting to work with. But even when I'm working digital, it usually will still start on paper. So usually I will collage something and either know ahead of time that I might utilize digitally. So it happens in a couple of different ways. Lately, what I've been playing a lot with in my digital work is taking finished analog collages and manipulating the way they're layered over maybe digital images. Or I'm finding I'm starting to scan more of my leftover fragments from collage and saving those as assets that then I can incorporate into digital work. So it becomes more and more of a hybrid kind of operation. So for me, even my digital work starts with paper in some capacity. It's rare that I do something that's digital from the ground up.
I think it's specifically about analog collage, and this is probably a very basic question, but like I see collage work that's very meticulously cut out, very carefully. And then I see collage work where people have just like ripped shredded some paper and it's all over the place, it's furling and everything and it's stuck together. Where would you place yourself on that spectrum and why do you think you approach it in the way that you do?
Hmm. I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't do a lot of very, very precise cutouts. I'll do it when it's necessary, when I feel like it's right for the piece. And then I'll do my fair share of tearing. But one of the things I do like is I like the juxtaposition between those kind of torn, jagged lines superimposed with very clean, precise, kind of more geometric lines. I really try to utilize the fact that these are images, that they are photographs, and I don't try to make it seem as if it's anything other than that. So I like the play of making it clear that it's paper, but also I like emphasizing that it came from something else. Sometimes my cutting is a glorified way of cropping. So I'm more interested in cutting out what I don't want to be seen in the image to just draw attention to what I do want to be seen. And a lot of times it revolves around more of the perhaps maybe the unseen elements of an image, things that are overlooked but are the most telling. So it could be hands or feet or the particular aspects of a certain posture if it's a figure, or sometimes it's cut it down to where you're just getting the color or the texture, but you're no longer sure what it's a part of. And I think it's to emphasize that sense of quiet space in between things, that sense of the fact that everything is already an amalgamation of other things, and trying to just draw the eye in to appreciate or at least notice the uncanniness of even the most mundane objects. And I don't know if I've even answered the question or if I've just got lost in the explanation.
No, that was great. That was great. I almost felt like you were coming back to the meditation, or one could talk about just seeing those connections in the most mundane things, but really observing what's like really noticing. It feels like some of that practice it's even like noticing your breath. It's the most basic things that we take for granted, that we don't call out in our lives, that we stop and we take notice of those things.
I think that's precisely it. It's all a matter of noticing and noticing what happens when we notice that. We're constantly reacting to things. We're constantly being confronted with things, and everything will cause some kind of response. And I think that's what the collage work does for me. I'm watching what comes up when I see this piece. What comes up for me when this piece touches this piece? And how does that change? And what story might be there? I think for me, it's the reminder that language is our second language. And there is always a way to try to get at something that's beyond saying. And I think that's really what I try to do in collage as best I can.
I had a thought and it just completely escaped me because you just said something really interesting and I lost the plot in that moment. Darn it. Okay, it's gone. That's fine. Oh no, I remember. Actually, I was going to say how generous it is that people like you put out work. So artists or craftspeople put out this work that you create by noticing, but then also creates the opportunity for us to notice, and we'll notice different things. And we weren't involved in the creation of it, which is where you might do some of your noticing of how things, you choose to put certain things together or juxtapose certain things. But we still get the opportunity to notice what you've done and see what comes up for us without having had to do the work. So that's extremely generous of people to create work like that and put it out in the world so that the rest of us get such huge benefit from it.
I think that's the whole point. I mean, I think that's the purpose of the whole endeavor. I think art, when done right, is a paradox in that it is the process of the artist being armored and open all at once. I think what it is, it's taking all the heartache and the trauma and the joys and the hopes and the fears and the anxieties and the beauty and the exuberance and baking it into bricks and then building a temple out of it and then opening the doors, inviting everyone into this safe space that you've created for yourself, this refuge, this monastery, this kind of cloister, but then inviting everyone to share in what that space was created from, and allowing that safety and that refuge to be shared, and then seeing what happens from that.
I guess after this conversation, the questions I'd want to ask you are, what are you noticing? And what comes up for you when this piece touches this piece? You can learn more about Duane and his work on Substack. at Duane Toops and on Instagram at Duane Toops.